My name is Jonathan Gomez, and this video is about why I'm joining the military, specifically the Army, at 31. And before I tell you some of the reasons as to why I'm going to the military, I want to give a little bit of context because I always felt like my life would inevitably lead into the military. I just didn't know exactly how. And, I always had visions and dreams and, ideas about how cool it would be to be part of the military and the armed forces. And, my mom being a veteran herself, she was in the military for about 15 years, if I'm not mistaken. And she was an 88 Mike, if I'm not mistaken, and then eventually became a chaplain's assistant as well. So my mom's definitely had a time or two in the military. And, I remember going through some of my baby books and like some of the other memory books that we had. I don't even know what you call them, photo albums. And I remember seeing some of her war photos or like her time in the military. And I just thought how cool it was. I have vague memories of actually being either on base with her or somewhere around the military. I forgot in what context, but either way, it doesn't matter. So I had that influence. And then, seeing movies, if you're any sort of like kind of like a rough character to some degree as a kid, that kind of likes to get rough and dirty and, stuff like that. It's not uncommon for you to fantasize about being part of something like the military where, you have, top tier tactical training, you get to shoot guns, blast things, and you're also part of like this greater idea, this greater mission that's so beyond you, it's unreal. And then you have a band of brothers, you're part of a battalion of some sort. So it's like that was always fascinating to me. But just like any other story, hopefully I don't sound too brash, but it's the only reason why I didn't join sooner is because I just didn't have the balls. And I think that that's the story for a lot of people because as I have these conversations with so many people about how I've joined the military, I never realized how many conversations I would have with people that would have similar conversations like, "Oh, I was this close to joining the military. I always wanted to join the military. My so and so has went to the military, and I was thinking about joining too." And not to shame anybody who didn't go. It's just a simple fact that whenever you're talking about men specifically, I think that there's an inherent instinct to want to be attracted to a sense of danger and adventure and maybe a particular set of violence. I don't know, but the fact of the matter is that in the heart of every man, I think is an inclination to want to be part of something. As to whether or not you should be or are fit to be or qualified to be is a completely different story. And throughout certain life circumstances, I found myself saying, why not? So, to give a little context, I've been running my own kind of micro video agency servicing clients in the creative realm for quite some time, almost about 10 years, specifically in video production, from content courses, ads, you name it. Like I've done a lot of things primarily for coaches, consultants, realtors, businesses, entrepreneurs of various walks of life. And so for me, I knew that I was relatively good at this and I've made it a career to some degree, but I always knew that that was never going to be the hill that I was going to die on. My brother and his influence, he was a marketer, a brilliant marketer, and he was an entrepreneur himself. And so by, I guess, association, I would eventually become that too, to a degree, and I would end up building my own business, courtesy of him, because he was a big part of my journey. And I just kind of let that ball roll, and I figured, well, if I'm making this money, there's really no goal or there's really no purpose into joining the military, because I feel like that's a big point of contention for a lot of people. Either I have a lot of options and I have a lot of access to capital because of the job that I'm working, or I have no options and I have to figure it out and go the hard way, aka I got to go to the military. I'm not saying that that's an exclusive path for a lot of people, but I know that that's some things that people kind of balance out in when deciding to go to the armed forces. I found myself in a place where it wasn't necessarily me being out of options per se, but it was more so about, am I fulfilled with what I'm doing? And God's honest truth, I could not tell you that I was. And the reason why that was is because for me, it just didn't feel something that lit my soul on fire. I know a lot of guys in the creative space that make a lot of money, upwards of 20, 50, sometimes even 100 grand a month in their own little micro agencies. And that's fantastic for them. And for me, I'm a little bit more of a person that thinks beyond. And so for me, I just realized like this isn't the legacy that I want to live. This is, you could throw as much money as you want to me, and this isn't what's going to light my soul on fire. And so eventually I found myself in a predicament where I'm like, I think I need to choose a really hard choice. And over the span of a year, give or take, I opened up the conversation to the wife, and she was shocked. And I forgot to mention that I'm married for 5 years faithfully, and I am incredibly blessed by this marriage and having a supportive wife. And so when I brought up this conversation with my wife that I was thinking about going to the military, it was a little uneasy and there was a lot of tension. However, she knew that there was something deeper inside of me that I was looking for that I just wasn't sure of. And if this was the path that I was confident in, she would 1000% support me. And so, lo and behold, time goes on. I get busy with clients. I get busy with work. I kind of get distract myself. And then I'm like, you know what? I'm not in a rush. Let me just think this through. So a year goes by. I try out different businesses. I don't really do that well. And just, I'm getting bombarded by life and just getting more and more defeated. And I just realized I think I might be craving something a little bit more adventurous, a little bit more dangerous, something that's going to give me a sense of pride in life for doing the things that I'm doing. And if I can have that opportunity of having the honor of serving our country and being part of protecting it, that's sure as hell going to make me feel a lot more confident than just making videos for clients. And not to say that that's not an honorable thing for you if you do that. For me, it just wasn't fulfilling. And during a time in my life where I was kind of sifting through a lot of these existential questions of like, why am I even here on earth? I found myself in a point where I was no longer trying to figure out what I was living for. I wanted to know what was worth dying for. And some people might criticize that and be like, man, that's morbid, that's dark, you shouldn't be thinking that way, that's super negative. I don't know. I don't know what some people's point of contention would be on that viewpoint. All I know is that for me, I needed something greater that came with a sense of conviction that would put an extra drive in me in this life to figure out what is going to light my soul on fire. And not only that, what am I going to be proud of? I don't have kids, so I don't want to have kids in this life trying to figure out, if I've lived to the fullest of my potential, because I never want to see their dad ever be in a place where he has unfulfilled potential. That to me would just crush me. And I would hate for my kids to face that themselves, knowing that I can't love them because I could barely learn to love myself. And that's huge for a man to be able to admit. A lot of men have to go on a lot of different healing journeys and got to do a lot of soul searching. And I've been through my own. I've had a lot of coaching, mentoring, and so more often than not, I have these conversations with myself, and I have to figure out what am I going to be happy with at the end of the day. What will I tell my kids that I'm proud of at some point? What can I tell my wife? What can I tell my mother? So during this journey, I figured, well, if I'm going to do it, I might as well do it now. I'm 30. At the time I was 30, by the time I pulled the trigger, I'm 31, and I can't be more grateful to know that I am now officially sworn in. As of February 12th, I am now officially sworn in as a soldier, or as an enlisted soldier. The fact of the matter is that I am 100% dedicated to this path, and I'm okay with whatever comes. I think with that context, I'd like to break down as to why I made this decision, and also the career path that I chose and where I plan to go next. So along this journey, I knew that there was going to be a point where I needed to find reasons as to why I was joining and make sure that I solidified them so they would act as an anchor for whenever the winds and waves of life would come against me, and other people's input, self-doubt, things like that. And I would eventually find myself wondering if I had made this wise decision. And so I took it upon myself to write some reasons down as to why I was going to the military. And that was important for me because part of me still was wondering if I had made the wrong decision. But as I was contemplating it, there was a slew of different reasons as to why I was going. But they were all throughout spurts of time where I was like, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. So I'm like, instead of kind of always having to conjure up these ideas as to why I'm joining over the span of like a year or two of making this very lifelong critical decision, I might as well just write it down. So every time I have those doubts, that I will always have a place to remember why I'm even doing this in the first place, right? And, especially just on that nature, is that sometimes, as long as I've learned about myself over the span of life, is that your mind is not always your best friend, meaning that there are plenty of case studies in science and whatever the hell else to back that. Your mind is in a very self-preservation type of state. So a lot of times you'll have these moments in your life where your mind is often working against you and trying to convince you that the decisions that you're making might not be within your best interest. And sometimes it's okay to just turn your mind off, to turn your brain off. And so for whatever that's worth, if that's helpful to somebody, awesome. If not, then I guess you could just throw that away. All right. So reason number one, I wrote to be a servant leader to those who may need me most, to show the love and leadership of Christ, and be a missionary in the most chaotic environment humanly possible. That was number one. And look, I'm no stranger to understanding that this is going to be a chaotic environment, and there might be some people that like me, some people that don't, and there might be some people that just don't jive with the fact that I'm a man of faith. That's completely understandable. But the fact of the matter is that I typically like to bring my faith in every environment that I can possibly bring it into, not overtly to the point where I'm like wearing I'm a Christian on my shirt, but I typically like to do it throughout the conversations that I have and making sure that people could assess that while engaging with me. I don't typically like to shove that down people's throats. I like to let people know who I am as time goes on and making sure that they know that, what my fruits are, essentially. Making my wife and mom proud. My mom specifically because, obviously she was an Army brat, so that was super cool. I definitely want to carry on the lineage if I can. With her being in the military, I would like to be in the military, and then hopefully at some point down the lineage, I have kids who also join the military. Granted, if it's the same in the next 18 years. So there's that. And then my wife, I want to prove to my wife at some point that I'm okay with facing some of the hardest challenges, because that to me is crucial, because there have been certain points in my marriage where she's seen the worst parts of me, where I've just collapsed under pressure and I've become, defeated, and I've just kind of accepted my fate in life knowing that I'm just sometimes just going to suck. And that's a really horrible feeling to feel as a man, because we're supposed to be the foundation, we're supposed to be the rock, and it's hard sometimes when you know that some things in life can get to you. But if it's one thing that I know that witnessing other leaders in the military or armed forces is that a lot of them build up a sense of resiliency, especially when you talk to these other guys, like let's say Navy SEAL or any kind of tier 1 person. It's pretty evident that when you are molded by the military, there's a certain breaking of habits when it comes to your fight or flight responses, and you learn to kind of fight your way through certain situations. So just having that mental fortitude meant a lot to me as a man, and I know it was going to mean a lot to her. So that's huge for me. To gain the most elite training in the world when it comes to tactical and combat and weapon skills. Now, again, with our world becoming the way that it is, I think it's pretty self-evident that, we're more prone to being exposed to violence on a everyday basis. I think so. Whether it's just regular conflict, throughout the streets or throughout certain common areas. And so for me personally, I want to know that at any given point, I have unique tactical strategies or skills that are offered by the military, which is like the best place you can get them. And so that I know that I can protect my wife and my future kids and my family and everyone around me. I don't think that that's a bad goal. I think that that's a goal that everybody should strive to. To see what I'm truly made of when my back is against the wall and I'm forced to carry out my commitments to my unit and my country and also my family and everyone else, right? So that's going to be huge. And really, it's kind of the ultimate scenario when it comes to being forged in fire. And I want to know what I'm truly made of and what me personally is capable of. So, and I'm sure shit about to find that out. Another one was to bring out the leader in me that I would have never known had I not joined. Now, again, if it's one thing that the military can do really well is bringing out a sense of leadership, because you're not just told to follow, but you're also told to lead. You have to lead your squad, your unit, your platoon, whatever. It doesn't matter. Like they really emphasize bringing out a sense of leadership, and that also is kind of what attracted me. And I could be wrong, but that's also what attracted me to go Army specifically, because being a Ranger, an Army Ranger, being part of the 75th Battalion was something that I always wanted to be. And some of it could have been the marketing influence, because they market really well and their optics are really good, and they kind of promote the sense of badassery, if you will. But also when it comes to Ranger School, and when it comes to just the overall belief systems and culture they facilitate, for some reason that just seemed a lot to me. But they also seem to promote a sense of leadership, and that's kind of why I wanted to go down that route. So being a leader to the best of my abilities was definitely on my highest priority list when going throughout this entire process. Last but not least on this list, for the most part, is learning what it means to not be afraid of anything. Kind of back when I gave context in the beginning of this video, where I had basically said that I always wanted to join, but I just didn't have the balls. There are always these points in our lives where we're always afraid of something. And more often than not, it's not necessarily something, it's more of an unknown. We don't know what we're about to get ourselves into, so I might as well just avoid it if I can. So for me, that makes a big deal, because there are points in my life where I felt like I was afraid a lot and I was very risk averse. Building a business throughout my career was actually pretty scary for me, because, you have to take a lot of risks. You have to innovate. You always have to do something to keep that business afloat. And so for me to know that I can withstand the pressure of that, I definitely proved something to myself. However, it's, there are other points in my life where I feel like fear could creep in. So I just want to know what it means to be fearless. And the only way to do that is to go to the very things that scare me, which is this, because I don't know one person who could just think to themselves that they're never going to be scared going into the armed forces at any given point. Like, that just seems crazy to me. Is that I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of things that scare me, which I'm inevitably going to have to either fight or flight. So I had wrote down here on my phone, and this was a little bit more of a lengthy paragraph, where I said, for the past 10 years, I got to experience what it was like to be on my own and run my own business. The conclusion, I wasn't super good at it, to be honest. I mean, I was good at, I guess, doing business on a okay basis, but when it comes to scaling and really kind of innovating and all that other stuff, I could have been better. But what I am good at is integrating in a team, working side by side with people, being the support person for those around me. In the next venture, the military hits all my core needs for what I'm looking for in this life. So hopefully within the next 10 years may give me the things that I'm looking for all this time. So I really do think that the military is going to give me a sense of adventure, danger, camaraderie, leadership capabilities, a sense of fearlessness, where I'm just it hits all the things that I kind of desired in one, that I don't think I could have been able to get as a civilian normally. And last but not least, I had written down that after my previous experience of working at the company that I recently got let go from, and being around a team, I didn't realize how much I would like it, from the employment to the camaraderie to the consistency to some of the things that they did day in and day out. It only made me recognize my need for structure, not just professionally, but personally. Working with others is what gave me life. Working by myself in my own business was the very thing that was killing me. Being in isolation. And for anybody that knows what it's like to run a business, is that a lot of times, more often than not, you're pretty isolated. And that's the one thing that somebody like me doesn't really jive well with. I need to be around company. I need to be around other people. I'm a social butterfly at heart. And so to know that I'm just working by myself, for myself, it just sometimes didn't rub me the right way. And it was honestly crushing my spirit in a lot of ways. So I actually preferred to be an employee a lot of the times. But life circumstances dictated that I was actually better off just kind of being self-employed, at least financially. That made a lot more sense. So, but I realized that I think at this juncture of my life, I actually crave a sense of camaraderie and being in other people's presence and really working cohesively as a team. That's the stuff that brings me joy. After delving out these entire reasons, one of the other things that I had to mention was the MOS that I wanted to go for was infantry, because infantry is probably one of the best or one of the better options to help you get through the pipeline to Special Forces. And in my journey, I wanted to go Army Ranger. Army Ranger means a lot to me. It had a huge impression in the way that I view the military. It just felt right. Some people choose SEALs, other people choose MARSOC, PJs for Air Force. So at the end of the day, I knew that that's the route that I wanted to go to. So again, I'm still ironing out the details. I may not even have a clear plan, but the fact of the matter is that I wanted to go infantry, wanted to get combat skills, wanted to get weapon skills, and then eventually translate that over to Rangers, which we'll figure out where to go from there. But apparently on my contract, which I made sure to get this on my contract, which was 11X, which is kind of like what seems to be like a selection process. 11X is a infantry candidate designation where recruits do not choose between 11B or 11C until they are in basic training. And so that's where I think the military eventually chooses to designate you to either B or C, depending on how they need you and where they see fit as to contingent upon your capabilities. Most people would agree that this is a great starting point for anybody who wants to be in Ranger, Airborne, or any other kind of special force unit. So that is definitely something that I'm personally looking forward to, and that's kind of the adventure that I think I was craving, and that's why I think I wanted to do this specifically. In conclusion, making this decision was definitely not an easy one, and a lot of self-awareness, inner work, and counsel had to all converge at a point to help me make a better educated decision as to whether or not this was the wise choice. Now, I am a man of faith, and very rarely would you ever hear me say something audacious as, God told me to do this. I don't speak like that, never have, never, most likely never will. Is that I don't talk like that. I don't talk like a charismatic, nutty Christian who just always feels the need to approve his own decisions by filtering it through the lens of God told me this. I do believe that there is a huge portion of divine sovereignty and human agency where our relationship with God dictates that we will make decisions out of faith and God will help guide our steps along the way, because what God, I know for a fact, doesn't bless is being idle. That's typically the devil's playground, and there's a whole adage about that. But the fact of the matter is that I know for a certain fact that there was a burning desire in my heart to make this decision, and after having wise counsel around me, from not only military people, specifically from special forces, all the way down to just regular basic infantry people, I got a lot of wise counsel from it. And then two, I had great conversations with my wife to help solidify that. So it really does. I really was able to cover all my bases when making this decision. And for anybody that's watching this video, I heavily implore you to do as much research as you can, not only about your MOS, but consulting your family, consulting anybody close to you, because a lot of that support system could really come in handy. Now, there are people that have obviously given me negative news at the same token. They're like, oh yeah, good luck being in infantry, those are where idiots are, or good luck being around a bunch of 20-year-olds who just want to dick around all day. It's like it's a lot of people were kind of like warning me of what I could expect, but either way it didn't matter because I know what I wanted to do and nothing was going to change that. I appreciated the I guess unsolicited advice, but just didn't really care. And at this juncture of my life, one of the biggest Bible verses that is kind of supporting me on a foundational level throughout this process was Proverbs 16:33, if I'm not mistaken. But there's a couple different variations of this verse throughout Proverbs 16. But the one specifically is in this translation, it goes, "We may throw the dice, but the Lord determines how they fall." And that's exactly what I reference when we're talking about these decisions about that we make in life as humans, where we have human agency and divine sovereignty, that we still have the capability of doing the things that we're going to do, but ultimately the Lord's say-so has providence over everything, where his decisions are his decisions. So whether it be through physics or whether it be through divine intervention, is that the dice will fall as God sees fit. And that is not for me to be privy to. That is for God to solely know, and that is for me to figure out. And I am a huge believer. I'm a huge believer when it comes to understanding that God is very gracious, especially when guiding our steps, even when we stray from what should have been a better path. And so, if this video serves as any kind of encouragement for anybody, that's ultimately the main goal as to why I'm making this in the first place, is that I haven't started yet, but I'm highly encouraged and I'm highly excited and looking forward to it. But at the same token, I want to document this process as I go on. And if it is an encouragement to someone, that'll be a huge blessing for me, because I didn't get to see a lot of this perspective when making these critical choices. I saw MOSs, I saw, people talking about benefits, and all those things are great. But from a faith perspective, I definitely plan to be the best leader I can be, and making sure that I can support those around me who need it, and being the blessing to the men around me who might need somebody to either be there spiritually, mentally, or emotionally. So till then, we'll see where this goes.